We had a bleep. We had a bleep. We had a bleep. We had a bleep. So much noise. Maybe we should turn the lights on. The intermission lights.
We're back on there.
Yeah, back on. Get the people in the back, they're the most interesting, because they have the transition.
It wouldn't work.
Welcome to part 2 of the review, post-Arvit, of Vayechi Siyum Bereishit of Shin Vav. And we called it the Siyum of Maaseh Bereishit, not only the Siyum of Sefer Bereishit. We do a brief review before we continue. So we saw this as a multiple idea of closure and its connectedness to the future and the potential of integration. And all of these three things are what we are being osik here. We found that the darg of Yaakov Avinu's avodah of creating even what we took to be, mistakenly, things that were lacking in bracha, in the original three shvatim, as actually being making the ultimate bracha, v'zot asher diber lehem aviyim, in which it was possible for the first time to actually snip off those pieces that were the sevach, so to speak, the ne'echaz b'sevach of those three shvatim, to be able to take out the av, to take out the pachas kamayim, and to leave the b'chor Yisrael, which is expressed later on in Pinchas, and we found over here is taken into consideration by Yosef as well. We see this in the Haftarah. We see this about the story of Rabbeinu HaKadosh that shares even the part that Yaakov Avinu lo made. We find exactly the same with Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who would come back, make Kiddush in his house every Friday night for exactly the same reasons. These are the constructors of Mishnah. Vayakem Yaakov Mishnato, mi Mishnato. And the structure of Mishnah is essentially that which provides for the same thing that's provided for here. The structure of Klal Yisrael and the Midbar, the Seviv Mitotav of Yaakov Avinu, the way in which the Galim would be given, and so on. And we found throughout this entire story 2 levels. And those 2 levels were originally reflected in the 2 levels of the dreams of Yosef, one of which presented him as a sheaf. And indeed, as that sheaf, which is an avatar for the Yosef who became Sofnat Paneach, he's not even present, and nobody would know who he was. We would see him exactly as he defined himself. The Michya. Obviously, as a sheaf, me big chief sheaf, and therefore I'm going ahead giving everybody the food that is necessary. And that's all that I am, and I don't see myself as anything other than that. And then the second level, which is only Mekim over here, is Yosef as Yosef. And everybody's Mishtachavim Li, and that only takes place in this parasha. So it's a closure even of the description of the original Mishtachavai of the Kochavim, Kochavim, which takes place only now, and the Mishtachavai, the Yaakov Avinu himself. But these 2 dreams were just really an opening into a parsha that is constructed of 2 levels on so many different areas. Whether it's talking about the Kfura and Yaakov, which on the one hand is given to Yosef and Yishmuah, and on the other hand is given to the Shvatim. On the one hand is given to Imavotai, on the other hand is given in terms of the Ma'arat HaMachpelah in great detail. On the one hand is given in terms of Rachel, and the other is given in terms of Leah. And on the one hand is given as Yisrael, and as the other is given as Yaakov. And that becomes 2 identities throughout the parasha, Yaakov and Yisrael, which in one place is tremendously dramatic difference between them, and that's the transition between Yaakov and Yisrael and the brachot that are given to Yosef and to his children. And then we had, of course, the two levels of bracha, in which in the one we seem to be discussing things that are mostly generic, and in the other we're B'dafka osek, as the Medrash puts it, to give each person the kol echad, the echad, exactly the way that Yaakov Avinu was defining them, and therefore he calls himself El Yaakov Avichem. You should know El Yaakov Avichem, says the Midrash, means El Yaakov Avichem. You have to recognize your father as a God who actually goes and creates worlds and creates the Yisrael as it will be, the ultimate Mishnah. And these two types of brachot, not just two sets of brachot, become very, very deeply ingrained when we talk about what happens with Ephraim and Manasseh. And that part ends up becoming very important to us later, as we'll see. And that is that Yosef indeed recognizes on his own, he has to bring Ephraim and Manasseh, and that they need to be incorporated into Yisrael on two different levels. One as Reuven and Shimon, which is the ultimate vindication of the fact that Yosef not only raised them in a completely different milieu and without Yaakov Avinu's hashpa'ah, and actually named them for that fact and saw that as an expression of what it is that he had to contribute for the new world in which he was found. And so celebrated both the end of the old world with the Mashani and the beginning of the new world with Yifrani. And this Yifrani now becomes part of the brachot for some reason that are so central to the closing of this period because they're part of Ani El Shaddai. And every time that that name is invoked, it always is Nogea, the original bracha to humanity, which is the original Vayevarechotam Pru'ervu, and that Pru'ervu, the Kivshu Haaretz, is exactly what is meant to be over in the literal sense of Koach Ma'asav V'Yid La'amod. And this is the last time that we talk about that. That was entirely the bracha to Yosef, a very graphic description of the elements of Zachar and Kivan reproduction in his own personal bracha. And that becomes the determination of who goes first, Ephraim and Manasseh, depending on who is more viral, who has more children, and so on. And that goes in the end to the Mechaber, the beginning of the parsha. The Zohar puts out with the Vayechi Yaakov, the Madrigal of Yaakov, in turning into Yisrael, is actually connected to the closing pasuk of the previous parasha, which talks about Yisrael as Yisrael for the first time. Not as Bnei Yisrael, but Yisrael takes an achuzah, vayifru vayirbu, and this is when they become Yisrael, and therefore it has to be mechuber to Yaakov as Yisrael. Amazing transition, all part of what appears to be the bracha in the end to the Yidgilorov B'Kerev Haaretz, the special relationship that Yaakov Avinu now makes with the Bonim of Yosef, and the understanding that this is on three completely different levels, which we're going to have to understand. One is with Yaakov Avinu, in which he also puts Ephraim first. One is with Yisrael, but it's Yisrael to the children only through Yosef, and that is a bracha that is called the bracha to Yosef, and that we understand seems to be the same bracha that we have about the Shvatim later. But the other is some new issue which doesn't seem to contribute any type of understanding of Ephraim and Manasseh. It leaves us very shaken in a way because the entire thing begins with the siluk of the Shekhinah, which also takes place twice in the parasha. The siluk of the Shekhinah, we understand later on, relates to the opening of the parsha, Lama Parsha Zut Tuma, because there was the Setima of the Kates from Yaakov Avinu, which was that siluk Shekhinah, and needed to now be described on a different level. The Zohar puts obviously wouldn't change our mind and suddenly discuss something completely different, but we must have somehow transposed the entire octave into something that is unrecognizable to us as direct Kates, but it was definitely the same issue. With the Zohar, that's the whole point. If I'm going to tell you about Acharit Hayamim, believe me, that's what I'm telling you about. The fact that maybe you don't see it so clearly as you would have had a bit more open, fine. So Siton, the Kates needs to be Satun, that I understand needs to be so. Okay. And we found the amazing details of the complexity of how it is that Yaakov Avinu arranges for the actual bringing it into Eretz Yisrael to be something other than the Anochi Al-Chagam Alo later on of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which that requires the traveling to the Midbar as if it were the meat of Yaakov Avinu. He sees the transposition of himself as an individual into the identity of Yisrael, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be Balaam in Mitzrayim, and therefore carefully avoids any sense of Aliyah. Yosef himself, as Rabbi George has pointed out, is careful not to take any steps to himself approach Paro with the funeral, because the entire idea of this Aliyah has to come as part of Mitzrayim, Evil Mitzrayim, the Ziknei Mitzrayim, the Chashuvei Mitzrayim, the Shlita Mitzrayim, so that he sees himself as a supplicant to Paro instead of Paro's one who is loved as a son, as the Rambam puts it. Why not just go and ask Big Daddy to take care of it? No, that's the whole point, that this has to be done by Mitzrayim, because then we even have a remnants later on to become the Tapchem. Tapam remained behind, Bikarchem, the Bikaram remained behind, in order to make it clear that we are in fact still, not only still, but very deeply. This was the other level of the Stuma, which is Nistatmu Ineyan, from the She'ibud. This is part of the She'ibud, and Chas v'Shalom that Yaakov in any way went to affect the She'ibud. On the contrary, the Yerida of Mitzrayim was something that was part of what Kel Shekaya told him. And now the period comes to the end of Bereishit, to the end of that shame, and a shame that is, of course, going to be involved in the way in which things are selected through reproduction, whether it's reproduction of galaxies, or reproductions of universes, or reproductions of crystals, or reproductions of DNA molecules, or reproductions of human beings. Basically, selection takes place through reproduction. Therefore, it's very deeply involved in the nature of kivush, which is the selection and the determination of the direction that things will take. And this becomes now the kivshua of Yaakov Avinu in his ongoing position of Elohei Israel. That occurred before when he built the Mizbeach, and here he asserts himself, Elohechem Yisrael. Now, what we had left off with was the very strange fact that at the end of all of this incredible integration and closure, which we're thinking that we finally have some type of real resolution of the issues that began with the Shtei Chalamot that come here at last to their final Pitaron, and it turns out that Yosef, everything that he dreamt of, actually happens, it takes place, and the most amazing thing is that it takes place, that last Ishtach Havoya, within the worst possible circumstances that you could imagine, which is after all of this planning and after all of this complexity, and we're on our way back to Mitzrayim, and now all of the Umm have been Teila Kitreim, Saviv, as if they were Saviv the Goren Ha'atat, like it would be like barbed wire around the Goren to prevent the people sleeping in at night, which of course is the story of Mashiach Tzidkenu and Ruth and Boaz and so on. But this becomes Goren Ha'atat, which all the Ummot are Mechumatu. They see Kitrosha Yosef, the Mitzrim are so Machabed Yisrael, they put the brothers up front, as Chazal tells Rashi brings the difference in the Psukim. They come back, everything seems to be wow, we really have things together. Now the Keter of Yosef, the Achim, walking hand in hand, the Mitzrim put them ahead, they're in the back, everything's great. Come back to Mitzrayim, and astoundingly, we discover Lu Yistabim and Yosef, and they get together to make up this whole ridiculous story, which undoubtedly they didn't expect Yosef to believe. It seems to be a very nice way of saying what we don't want to say up front, which is really strange. I mean, there's a seder to Bikush Mechila. So first you go to the guy and talk to the guy, Then if he doesn't respond, so you send a friend. And you do this 3 times, and then if he's not Mocho, then he's the one that's the Chotei. Over here, they make up a story, and then the Medrash tells us they send B'nai Bila, it's Rashi's, we found the friends, you're the ones that you're closest to, that could talk to, he'll talk about. I mean, for heaven's sakes, let's face the issue, talk it out. No. Worse is, of course, that we don't find Yosef responding, as Rabbi Malka says, I mean, this is a disaster. If all he does is do his little shtick with the Lemichyah Shalachani Alechem, with the Hatachat Elohim Anochi, which is one of the last issues that we haven't seen yet, is exactly the same between Yaakov and Yosef. Both of them said those words, Hatachat Elohim. So here's this last piece of Yosef, which seems to be avoiding the issue. I mean, we're not asking you to be God, we're just asking you to be a mention. And it says there, it's a disaster, and because he didn't forgive them, because of that, we have the Asra Harugei Malchut, and earlier on, the Rabbeinu Bachya suggested in the previous parshiot that maybe Yosef is really one of the Asra Harugei Malchut, even though he was the victim, but he wasn't the victim, because after all, it was all his fault, this whole thing, and it's a very, very strange way to end what is meant to be closure. I mean, this would give you an entire year additional psychiatric services. I mean, the most wonderful thing that your doctor would, oh, great, yes, we still have problems. That's lovely. So we've got a lot of unresolved issues, and we need to understand what's going on. And that perhaps could provide for us a key to getting a deeper sense of what is really going on. It's impossible to accept that this story itself, because it is the core of the kiyum of the actual dream of Yosef, that up until now was still an open-ended issue, that we should close that open-ended issue with this ridiculous piece is just unacceptable. So this was what his chalom was, that his brothers would suspect him, and that I mean, that is very, very strange indeed.
It closes by Nachem Otam by Badera Hamizon.
That's not a closure. That's not a closure of his dream. And by Nachem, thank you very much, but why not just tell me if you're okay? That's how they're made about it. And that, it sounds more like Rashi says, I'll tell you some good things you'll see. You don't have to worry about me. And Nerachad, and the whole story. Fine. So,
it sounds like that they want him to take personal ownership, and he's just refusing to.
Yes, it does. It definitely does. He's Bedavka saying, well, it doesn't really have anything to do with me. I mean,
It just doesn't.
but it does, doesn't it?
And that's a mirror image of what happened in Vayigash and over here. They can't crack him down. They can't break him down, so to speak.
You were saying the mirror image.
Yeah.
Mirror. Yeah, it looks like it anyway. On the surface, it looks like it. And the truth is, there's a very strange relationship here. Speaking of Avon, very strange relationship to Yom Kippur. Because Chazal speak out the craziest thing. The Chek Yutal HaGoral, what is Yutal HaGoral? Somebody's got to decide which one is Lashem and which one is La'azazel. Or, this means the Goral is basically what each one of the Shvatim is meant to take. So this tells us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu assigned through Yaakov Avinu what each one of the Shvatim would be, and he gave them their Goral. Of course, the Goral is an often strange word to use because that's exactly what was said to Daniel when he was told to be Stom the Kates. V'kom leGoral Cha, the Kates Hayamin. Whoa, wait a minute. This is the only other time that, my gosh, how did the Rambam figure out that Yom Kippur is the Kates Bechilav is Yisrael, right? And that's the very Kates that we're being meramis to over here. And we don't get it. What happened? So obviously things are not quite what they seem. So I would like to perhaps suggest an alternative approach. And I think that the alternative approach allows us a deeper understanding of what is really happening. I don't believe that the brothers asked for Bechila. This is not a way of getting Bechila. And what they said to Yosef was something entirely different. What they said to him was, let's read it over again. Vayashov Yosef Mitzrayim ahu ve'echav ויראו אחי יוסף כי מת אביהם, ויצוו יוסף לאמור אביך ציווה, כה תאמר יוסף, אנא שנה פשע אחיך וחטאתם, and now we ask you, ואתה שנה לפשע דאלוהי אביך, Vayechi Yosef Bedabram Elav, which, by the way, the Midrash says he cried for the same reason the Kohen Gadol cries on Yom Kippurim, because they were choshedim, which is a rather strange Yom Kippur. But the Midrash relates directly to Yom Kippur. So it's very weird. My suggestion is that Sana has nothing to do with Mechila. Sana is specifically the language that you use when Mechila is impossible. Can't be Mechila. Because basically, let's take a look. What is Yom Kippur for? I mean, Yom Kippur is the Tikkun of the Egel HaZahav, right? It's the response to the Egel HaZahav. The result of Yom Kippurim is HaShochen Itam B'toch Tumota. Because we're not looking for a Tikkun. And this, despite the fact that, as the Zohar points out, Yom Kippur is really the visitation of Olam Haba, the Olam of Binah, and so on. And the result of it, nonetheless, is as long as we are Sa. That's what Sa means. Sa is basically a holding pattern. Hold it. Carry it over. The simple reality is, there's levels to this reality. The way the Sifurno has a brilliant way of looking at it. And if the way that I'm understanding the Sifurno is correct, what the Sifurno says, look, what you did, essentially, you did in truth. In truth. It was true what you did. Because you were convinced, right? So if you thought I was Rodef, your din was a din emet. What am I going to say? So I understand. What is there? Fine. So at the most, it's a shkaga. I understand what you're coming to me from Bechila. The meaning of that, gentlemen, is, what do we do on Yom Kippur? Kol Nidrei. Hatarat Nidarim. What in the world does that have to do with it? Everything to do with it. Because the issue is, what they are saying to Yosef over here is, well, I'll be damned. You were right all along. It worked out exactly like you said. And here's the last piece. Incredible. So therefore what? Therefore now can I say, given the same circumstances, boy, I'm a lot brighter now. I would never do something like that. Nonsense. You do exactly the same thing. The Gemara has many cases where we search for a petach of a neder, can't find a petach. Because in order to have a petach to be matir and neder, you have to tell the guy, if you would have realized at the time that, and the thing that you have to realize can't be new information, because that's no lie. It has to be something that would fit into the nature of your consciousness at that time. So therefore, it really is, sometimes you find the Gemara spent the whole day figuring out, well, what if you would have thought, I would have made it anyway. Until finally, you are such an idiot. Get the heck out of it. Well, if I would have realized people would say I was an idiot, I wouldn't have made it. All right, that won't be mine. Okay, the bottom line is, what the Sifurno is saying is, what is it Shaykh to talk about Mechila? What is it that I could say that because in the end it turns out that you were right? So therefore what? Does that in any way teach us that you were right? I don't know. Maybe it worked out that you were right. Or does that in any way give us an insight into the fact that we could have known that you were right? Saying that this is the way it worked out doesn't help me. Even though I'm ready to throw myself into the reality of its having worked out. Now listen, Adam Arishon was Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov is being Shufred Adam Arishon. The 130 years that Yaakov Avinu spoke about the Paro and said, what a miserable life I've had. And you are looking at the boxer, and you're looking at every cut that laid him low until he cried out in his pain. Yes, that's what you're looking at, 130 years. The Gemara says for 130 years. Adam HaRishon Chasid Gadol Haya. And for 130 years, he did teshuvah and he was poresh and everything to try to be mitaken his chet. And people still die, I've noticed. Because there are certain things you cannot say I'm sorry for. Not because they're such big things that you can't say I'm sorry, but because they are part of what makes you you. They're part of the human condition. There's no saying I'm sorry. I know it would happen again. And this is Adam HaRishon, who when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, so what? What did you do? Where did you go? And Adam HaRishon responds with, I'll do it again. V'ochal. The deeper meaning of that v'ochal is, this is the human condition. What do you want me to know before I can know it? V'lo yitboshashu, am I supposed to be yitboshashu? How much complexity does it take for me to learn to understand what my options were? How much of our own lives are like that? You're saying, oh my God, if I had an opportunity to live again, I would do it differently. No, you wouldn't. Of course you wouldn't do it differently, because there would be no way that you could do it differently. It was you. It was because you were you. You can't say, I'm sorry for being me. I'm not talking about the little things in which, okay, I didn't wake up for tefillah today or whatever. That's not the issues that we're talking about. We're talking about the overall sense of the way you look at life that leads you into every possible sevach, which of course is the word for complexity in here. Right? The same ayah that is achuz b'sevach is our lives, locked into complexity and hopeless complexity. You know where we're going. That's what you're telling me. Well, you should have had it all figured out in advance. You're feeling so guilty about the way that you did this over the past 50 years. Could you possibly have thought any differently about it 50 years ago? Did you have a chance of doing it differently? There's no way that we are stupid enough, they say to Yosef, to ask you to be mochel. This would be ridiculous. Oh God, I'm really sorry about that ego. Could we just forget about it, maybe, forgive and forget a little bit? It's part of the human condition. That was death itself that came from the ego, exactly as it came from Gan Eden. How are you going to avoid the basic human drives for identification, for sensuality, for projection, for all of the issues that people torture themselves over so many years of their life in an attempt to achieve closure, what they call, and integration and so on? Of course the brothers were stupid. So what they were saying to him was, can we go forward, sana, and develop exactly the type of relationship that Yom Kippur develops with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? That Parah Adumah does. You're saying, but Parah Adumah is paradoxical. I know. I don't expect anything but paradox. These are the issues that will always be paradoxical. How do we go forward when we are who we are? Of course it's paradoxical. Death is paradoxical. So Parah Adumah is paradoxical. Life as we experience life is paradoxical. But I'm asking, say the brothers to understand whether we could go forward with one very simple question. Because it turned out that you were right, does that mean that you believe you were right? And Yosef's response is brilliant. The only one who knows I was right is God. I don't have the slightest idea. I know, I can tell you one thing, how close I came to not being right. So close that I lost those 10 drops of sperm. That's how close, but I lost everything. 10 shvatim, you're telling me, am I absolutely sure? I mean, come on, how close can you get and still say you're absolutely sure, right? There's nothing that brings that out of the Teshev, but Meitan Kashto in his bracha. What could bring out the actual physicality that any human being knows? Oh my God, it's too late. No, it's not too late. Maybe it is too late, but this is what he's going through, right? So this is exactly the point that's brought out in his bracha. That's amazing. So his response here about Tachat Elohim is a totally different way in which at that moment there really is a chibur. You think you're asking me, Sana, the way Moshe Rabbeinu asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be Nosei Avon? The way we have what Yud Gimel Midot HaRachamim? Nosei Avon V'Over HaPesha? Who am I? What do I know? You're asking the wrong question to the wrong person, and it's that moment that indeed really and truly is the closure of all of the issues that are open on that level. Because it's a complete acceptance of my own humanity and the own possibilities of the human condition, which in fact was Yaakov Avinu's own 130 years of tzar that took the place of Adam Rishon and Gan Eden, which of course is part of the Kel Shakai's determination of Bria. Remember, Vayechi Siyum Bereishit includes the story of Gan Eden. And that means that the whole idea at this particular moment that there was a serious possibility that maybe he was aware all along, Yosef, wasn't really true. He understood that he could not tell you at the time, and that the issues that were between us were real issues. Who knows where they would have ended up? And that's what the Sfordim is saying ultimately. Who knows? So you're saying, but it ended up working out. I mean, I don't know, do we hold with Brera? I mean, that's what it boils down to, right? Because it ended up working out, that means it was right all the time. I mean, anybody married here knows wife is always right, but she has no idea why she's right. But just ends up being right at the end, right? You'll never say, so she was right the whole time. She was wrong the whole time until it turned out she was right. It's true, though. It's an amazing thing. Universal phenomenon. This idea opens us up to an amazing likud, which has everything to do with all that's been taking place in this parasha. And that is the stimba of the kates, while nonetheless providing us, as the Zohar says, access to the kates. And what is that supposed to mean? If I don't understand what's going on, in what sense is it providing me access? How is it that, as the Zohar says, well, he's not going to change his mind and start talking about something entirely different? That's crazy. There would have had to have been a new introduction. You can't say, I'm going to tell you what's going to be about everything. I mean, and then start talking about the price of eggs in China and not mention, oh, by the way, there's been a change in the price of eggs in China. No. Okay, but what good is it? What's the point of it? How does it become part of the Mishnah that Yaakov Avinu is setting up, that Rabbeinu HaKadosh is setting up, and sees himself as Yaakov in this position? So let me first point out the three levels that we have here in that bracha that he gives to Yosef. Three completely different levels. One was the Yaakov, taking them in. The other one was the giving of this bracha to Yosef, through Yosef to his children. And the other is this bracha to the children itself, which is a very strange bracha. I'm not sure we're over there. It becomes important to Yosef, the order. We understood the first two. We understood the last. And the truth is, of course, that the last is crazy. Because if anyone would know what they're saying, it's a good thing people know what they're talking about. So you have all these people, they come home from shul, wearing their shtreimach, big kapata, come into the house, children, grandchildren come by, and, we're here to get our bracha. Yesimcha Link Ephraim and Menashe. It's a good thing that they don't know anything about Ephraim and Menashe. Because obviously the last people that they'd want their kids to be like is Ephraim and Menashe. When you'd say, you're crazy? I wouldn't even let them go to college. I'm going to let them be Ephraim and Menashe. I mean, they weren't even religious. I mean, not from my point of view. Right? Sorry?
That's why you can't find a nach in the basement.
It is, indeed it is. No, that's not funny. It's very true. Nobody is Jewish in Nach. It's obvious. It's very disturbing for people who have a vision of what it means to be a Ben Yisrael. There's no Ben Yisrael in the whole story. So, what does it mean to give that bracha? It's an insane bracha. I mean, why would anybody listen to it? It's like a matter of faith. No, it's a matter of case. Essentially, Yaakov Avinu is involved here on a tri-level journey with Yosef. The first stage of which was the open recognition that the best thing that provided for the future that he was so interested in providing was the future that he thought he had no connection to. I wasn't here. You did it your way. When I came, I had no idea what these kids would look like. And I had to be mishtachab on the discovery that you actually managed under these circumstances. Always a shock, But the final stage was not simply to be Muvarach that, but to recognize that there is a new Hanhoga that sounds exactly like Kel Shakai, which is pure, untrammeled reproduction without anybody taking the steps to define where it's going. And that in that lies a commitment to something that is called Kates. And that something that's called Kates is a very powerful idea which we usually don't connect to. We think that the issue between Yaakov as identity and Yisrael as an identity is similar to the way that we think about the Sulam Yaakov. There's aspects of everything that we do that has a counterpart in Kedusha, in meaningfulness, and there's significance in our Ma'asim. We have the whole Sefer Nefesh HaChaim, explain how every act that a person does, moves the Olamot, and wow, it's like really major stuff if you can get yourself to really, get into that kind of thing, and it makes you feel significant. Maybe that's a solution for your own sense of insignificance. Usually it isn't. You don't really feel that you know enough about what you're doing or have enough awareness of yourself, even in what you're doing, or have enough dayah or have enough kavanah that is really going to make a difference. There's a slight difference between Avraham Avinu bringing a glass of water to somebody and you're bringing a glass of water to somebody. One of them maybe gets water for 40 years in the midbar, so you don't really think that it's quite the same. So you're not 100% persuaded by that whole argument. It's attractive. You try to be reasonable. And what people do, and it's fascinating because I was at a Brit on Shabbat in which people tried to do. What people try to do in order to achieve that connectedness, were you at the Brit? You were here, Rich? No, you weren't here. So what people try to do is to create that relationship. So if I don't have enough kavanah, we can make more kavanah. We can create more of a sense of spirituality and shlemus, so instead of just making Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Haolam Yivah, it's like Baruch. No, this is an amazing situation. I'm saying I've never seen anything like it. And then we can give, before we actually cut, poor baby, before we actually cut, we can give a whole description, the meaning of Brit Milah and how we're supposed to be Mosin Nefesh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in doing this and bringing this Korban, it allows us to be able to, whatever they were saying, join the army, do that. I don't know, but it's really a whole big amazing shmooze, and everybody's, Everybody's moving back and forth and shaking and so on and so forth. I had to walk out. I was so absolutely disgusted. And you think, so why are you disgusted? So on the one hand, think like this. You're trying to interest somebody in a Brit Milah. So suppose I would go ahead and I would bring a regular guy off the street in Tel Aviv who has given a Brit Milah to all of his kids, right? Why, he has no idea. And I'd bring him into this, but you want to see something, a real Brit Milah? You say, oh my God, I can't believe I did it. I would never do it again. And really, you know that that's true. I would never do it again. Because all that happened is that you were completely mitzabtzin. You totally limited something that is so insane that it has no connection to anything reasonable. Other than in little Ramazim here, Ramazim there, but you understand that you're not dealing with this is to, but that's the Taliban understands that's Brit Milah. To teach us, Mesirut Nefesh, to be willing to go on jihad and to suffer and to be a shaheed and everything will be okay. And of course, it's a Brit Milah because you get 72 virgins at the end of it. What better thing than to have a good Brit Milah to get through all those virgins? And it's exactly the same story. I mean, okay, I'm not saying there's no Indian of, obviously that the Indian were true. But the reason the guy in Tel Aviv is doing the Brit Milah is the same reason that Ben Gurion said you can't live here unless you believe in miracles. He said, well, what do you believe in miracles? You don't believe in God. What does that have to do with it? And seriously, what does it have to do with it? I have no idea what I'm doing. But I do know that I am infused with an insane sense of the world is going somewhere, and I don't understand, but I know that I'm flowing along with it. That I know. And there's a limit to how much I'm willing to take my sense of what's appropriate and inappropriate and say it stops right here. And surprisingly, the craziest thing, which is doing this absolutely barbaric act to your poor little infant's penis, I mean, it's horrific. That's the last thing that you're going to drop. Why? Because that is a deep attachment to the whole idea of Anikel Shakai. You know that deep down, these are things we know nothing about, that you have experienced in your life as primary elements of your drives and your involvement, and you have no idea what is controlling it and how it's happening, but you sure aren't going to be the one who's going to put an end to it. That is the sensation of Keats. Keats is horizontal, and Yaakov and Yisrael is vertical. The idea of Keats is that somehow or other there is a vindication, exactly as it was by Yosef and the brothers. So it all worked out. That's right. I believe it's all going to work out. So does that mean that you were right the whole time? No, it does not mean I was right the whole time, but it does mean that I knew that I was involved in something that was going to work out and that I was doing my darndest to be part of it. It does mean that. Now, when you talk about the question of, okay, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu here, this shape is all into evolution. To such an extent, again, we think evolution is silliness, Darwinian evolution. That's this tiniest part of the most recent piece of evolution. The most fundamental evolution is, as Chazal tells us, it goes back to the original Enotodot Shamayim Va'aretz. It's the evolution of universes, the selection of universes. And now suddenly we have Eila Toldot Shamayim Va'aretz. Why Eila without a vav? Because at last, forget about all those broken up universes. They didn't work. We are in a universe that works. Now, how the heck do you know that? I mean, surely any intelligent life in any, perhaps, quintillions, or being as we're dealing with infinity, we could deal with Cantorian infinity. So infinity bait, So in all those infinities of universes, intelligent life was convinced Hera Toldot Shamayim Va'aretz, and the heck with all those other big guys. That's us, the other guys, right? I understand. Why are we?
Best of all possible worlds.
Exactly. That's how the shir started. This woman walks in and said, "Are things as they're meant to be?" It's the perfect question, because that's what the whole shir was about. Are things as they're meant to be? What a wild question. Oh, it's the human condition. It's the human condition what it's meant to be. And of course, this is the entire issue. The reason that we know without any question that this universe is sustainable is the same way that we know everything else about evolution. It's because it happened. It's because we're here. If we wouldn't be here, then we wouldn't be talking about it. And if the universe was not sustainable, it's not that it would have come to an end sometime in the future. Obviously, from the point of view of Vayechi Siyum Bereishit, it would be an unsuccessful try, and we would not be here talking about it. Now, what makes us think that we are not simply in the process of that within, and maybe Hinachinami from outside, it was not sustainable? Only one thing. Our sense of case. Had we experienced existence as being something that is completely local, we would not be convinced at all. And indeed, people who experience life that way, even if they believe in Olam Haba and they think there's great significance to their activity, they don't have any sense of case. And therefore, who knows when the whole thing in this quantum bubble just disappears. As it wouldn't matter because nobody would know. We'd all be together, so who cares? Which is itself a rather strange thing. Because in fact, this was a question that was raised 30 years ago, by Wheeler. I mean, if in fact quantum phenomena requires somebody to look into Schrodinger's box, who looked?
What was the question?
Who looked?
Who looked?
I mean, how in a universe in which everything is essentially simply entangled possibilities, who looked? And his answer was, which had tremendous mathematical implications that he worked on for many, many years, and that's still part of the whole description of the workings of quantum mechanics, is the case. That's his answer. We looked. But you weren't there. So the time function in quantum mechanics is completely meaningless. So you looked, and therefore it's basically a self-sustaining system. So since you are here, obviously in the end, you look well enough to be able to give existence to whatever was necessary to get you to where you are in the first place. But the same thing is true of our own experience of the case. We looked. And that's really what the case is all about. So even though Yaakov Avinu wants to be Megaleh the case, Kodesh Baruch Hu says, what be Megaleh the case? If you're Megaleh the case, you become a maniac. Because then everybody thinks that they know what's going on. The beauty of the case is nobody knows what's going on. And the moment they think they know what's going on, they destroy the whole Brit Milah. And you will walk out. Oh, I don't want to be part of that. Too many ideas. Too many certainties. There's no such thing as certainties in a world that proceeds towards case. But it does require no say of them. It requires the most incredible patience for things that are experienced by us as conditions. Conditions is the opposite of absolutes, by definition. Now it's all about conditions, human conditions, and all kinds of other conditions. This is the question that ends up being the question of the parsha. Is the interrelationship of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which the Medrash gives us a strange story about. And it appears in so many different ways, this story, in which Yaakov, I think, was about to be Megaleh the case, So Marshal to a Melech, here is a man that's been working for the king his whole life. He knows all the secrets of the Melech. Calls his family together to give them over all of the secrets. This is where you get this is where you can find this. And all of a sudden he sees a little peephole where the camera has a little red light on it, which it didn't have a minute before. He's all, oh. So he decides, yes, so I did call you together to be mindful at all times of being the Chabed the Melech. And then the end of the story, strangely, is that his sons tell him, okay, we get your concerns. So let's just have it out right now. Shema Yisrael, look, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. We are exactly on the same path that you are on. We understand where it's going. We understand what yichud by definition means. We understand how it has to end because it's the way we experience ourselves. There's nothing for you to discuss. There's no need for you to hide. We're exactly together. Baruch Shem Kivod Malchus Olam Vayed. We can't say that because it would mean that we're actually expressing the case if we say it aloud. Yaakov Avinu said it on the other end, so we do say it on the case. Which is within the same Nosei Avon, which is the Goral on Yom Kippurim, which is the Kam LaGoralcha of Daniel. That is the case Yami, which is a completely different way of experiencing our lives. That's how powerful the idea is. All of us understand that in life in this world, we talk about things that make no sense. We pretend that our life is magic. We use words that are silly words. And so when I go to sleep, my soul goes up to the sky. Oh, come off it, baby. We've got the whole thing down on electroencephalograms. And we know exactly what's going on when you go to sleep. There ain't no soul. It don't go nowhere. And we understand, unconsciousness and dreams. And, what are you talking about? This is just childish projections. You'd like to believe all of this, So we have two basically different ways of understanding in a serious way what we mean. One is that essentially what we're talking about is a simulation. In other words, if you had a soul, and on some level, which we don't appreciate, there must be such a thing because obviously it can't just be matter as we have it that happens to form in this particular way that would give an impression of consciousness and so on. It must be expressive of something about the nature of being. We're not stupid enough to think that it's an accident merely of the tiniest possibility of being. However, we understand, but it's not as if we actually have that in the physical terms, but we have an experience as if we were simulations of what it would be like if we could be conscious without needing all of these silly chemicals to work out and, cellular membranes letting in ions. That's a very clumsy way of simulating this idea of souls and consciousness, but it's close as you can come, So enjoy it. Nice to be a sim. Certainly better than nothing, right? That is the way most people lead life. It's really how they experience it. The other way of leading life is to recognize that what you are experiencing is not a simulation, it's an analog, which is something completely different. Look, when your watch is telling you what time it is, you know that time has nothing to do with quartz, it has nothing to do with gears or anything like that. Okay? So when your watch is moving, it's an analog to something that you believe is a property of the universe that you know nothing about, can't even begin to describe, but the watch is telling you something about something out there. So you don't consider it to be a simulation of time, you consider it to be an analog of time. And you understand that embedded in the nature of time, and therefore the direction and the idea of information and the questions of entropy and all the questions that arise because of this property of the universe. My watch ticks or buzzes or whatever it does and tells me something that is deeply important to me. But I'm not understanding it. Now, that's a completely different way. But if you really thought that your clock was only a simulation, you'd have a very difficult time dealing with time. Very difficult. Because then the confusion of what it's all about would leave you completely devastated about it. I can't find my hands and my feet in the universe. It would be horrific. Think about it. Absolutely horrific. Basically, the nature of Kates that is embedded in Kriyat Shema is something that allows us to experience life as if it is embedded. It's analogous. If it's analogous, it can be embedded. If it's a simulation, it's not embedded anything. It's however you run the simulation. That makes all the difference in the world. Because what that means is that every Ben Yisrael, as they say and experience that Shema Yisrael, and as they therefore speak exactly the way that Ephraim and Manasseh, and that's why it was important to Yosef. These are real people, Ephraim and Manasseh. What you were talking about before doesn't make any difference. That's your relationship to them, that's fine. But these are real people. You can't just say Ephraim and Manasseh, because then you're turning them into a thing. He's the Bechor, and he has to be treated as such, or what does this bracha mean? And what Yaakov Avinu recognizes there is that every Shema Yisrael in the future is going to be speaking to him for the same reason that Yosef was speaking to him. And that's why the Medrash here concludes with, therefore Mikan Zaka Yisrael v'Kriyat Shema, and Omrim Shema Yisrael Asher B'Ma'arat HaMachpelah. Oto Inyan, we're still there. It's still part of us. Exactly the same as it always was. I always compare this to Stardate, because that's essentially what Shema Yisrael is. It's logging on twice a day. You're going to log on. Logging off when you go to sleep. Logging off when you're about to die. And every day it's Stardate X reporting in Marat HaMachpelah. And we're still here. We're working on this. And we are getting closer to you. Watch out. We'll be there any minute now. And that's that sense of Kates that is so deeply embedded that not one instant of a life is led in a search for significance. It flows with significance. It's the no-say of significance. And that was the actual chibur that we have here at the end with Yosef and the brothers and Yaakov Avinu, and ultimately with Maaseh Bereishit itself. That's why it is so important. There's no other way that we could resolve these issues, and there's no other way that we can end it. We are waiting for contact, real contact, the contact that vindicates by Bereishit and that allows the rest to flow. It's the ultimate tipping point. In Vayechi, we can let go. Yaakov Avinu can let go. Yosef can let go. That's it. See you later. And that's exactly what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Daniel. Okay, you have the information. Go to sleep. Go to sleep? Sure. Go to sleep. And wake up. L'gor al-chav, l'keit sayamin. You don't have to worry about this. You have all the input that you put into the future, and you're living that future. What difference is it? Do you go to sleep at night? Why can't you go to sleep for 1,000 years, or 5,000 years? What's the difference? Are you trying to control things? You don't try to control things when you go to sleep at night. You go to sleep for a few thousand years. What's the difference? You understand where we're at. This is the mission of Daniel. And this is what it was that Yaakov Avinu finally recognized. Okay, at this point, what is left? Tekida. Elokim yifkod etzchem. Exactly as u'biyom pakti u'pakadti b'yegel hazahav. It's all about Tekida. It'll keep coming up. And it'll come up until it resolves itself, until you understand that Anochi alcha gam alo. And that requires that instant of vindication, which is the real sense that Yaakov is going to give over. That's all that needed to begin with. The Siluk HaShechina comes when you think you have answers to that question. So then it's mistalek, exactly as I walked out of that bris. I couldn't take it. I just couldn't take it. It was such a zilzal in the whole meaning of the hour of the Brit Milah. It turned it into a religious ceremony with great significance and so on. It became totally insignificant. It was painful to watch. You know, and only somebody who doesn't mind that sense of believes that you have things to do to make things happen. Forget about the case. No one knows that it's there. It offers them nothing further. Nothing. Basically, if you know what it means, nobody knows. You have to already happen. But that's the whole point. This is active ability to create this thing. And it's always retroactive. That's what I'm saying. Invisible whole to understand is that that's what that brother's saying. Yes, it's right. And yes, that retroactively means that this is the story and we are in it. And we accept that 100%. Whether that has anything to say about the nature of the condition, I don't know. You don't know. And you can tell us, it's so good to hear that, because that's exactly what we felt. That is a closure. If they come, they're willing to throw themselves at him at that point before he gives them a response. And his response to that is to say, you guys are absolutely right. I don't think I'm God. I never did. Then it's so perfect, a counterpoint to the Elohim Chashavala Tova initially, which what is that supposed to mean? On this level, we finally understand what it's supposed to mean. This is Yosef as Yosef, not as the chief. And this is Yosef saying, as he is, Elohim Chashavala Tova. That's all I know. When things work out, I know they're good. When you're asking me at the time, do you know it'll work out? Sure I do. You know how? Don't have a clue. Do you know your role? Not at all. Okay. But you sure know that it's the most incredible privilege to wake up in the morning and to know that this is another day towards that case. And to say that Shema Yisrael, and to feel that chibur to everything that was and everything that will be, and to close my Bereishit itself with that moment of vindication. Should we know the whole thing would have been to die for this morning's creation. This morning's creation. There's nothing it's absolutely enough for me. That meaning is the ultimate freedom that becomes the die in the end. That's the Dayenu and Pesach and Yitzhak. And it's always die. It's always die because Achi Yevusif Totechet Miloma die is the ultimate expression of. Well, of course, it was always enough. Every instant was always enough because the entirety was embedded in every instant. It's just a hologram. The fact that I need to wait because I want what to identify in terms of the type of information I'm used to handling with my meat brain. I mean, I understand that that's not all that important. Of course I do. And whoever doesn't understand that is doomed to a miserable life. So this becomes the real acceptance of Sona. It's the ego. It's the Loyut Boshashu. It's the whole problem of Adam Rishon in the first place. It's the question that the Malach has asked, what do you need these humans for? It's all those things that remained open that have found their moment in which now there's going to be answers. And I'm safe and sound when I close my eyes. So, Laila Tov, everyone. Now's a good time to actually at least take it for a night. So thank you so much for coming. It's difficult for me to explain to you because it's hard for you to believe that what a simcha is to be able to sit here and learn with you, because you think, okay, this guy's giving a class, when you come to a class, you don't understand at all, really. I don't think you can imagine what your presence means to me. Might have to.
I actually have a question.
You, of all people, the ultimate traitor.
And
Well, at least put the camera on yourself so you could suffer.
All right. How do we explain the irony in the fact that for hundreds and hundreds of years, Jews had no problem connecting to the Kates in a real, true, meaningful way? When there was no progress in terms of broad historical strokes, Jews were living miserable lives in the same places, kicked around. And now we're in a different era where theoretically it should be so easy to connect to the Kates because things are happening around us so rapidly, and we're back in Eretz Yisrael. We've Milchemet Sheshet Hayamim, just nisim of the flow of every day, and yet our generation, is, like what the Rebbe's experienced this Brit, has such a terrible time connecting to the Kates in a meaningful way.
I think that it's really not the case. I think that it's only the people that have a need to be religious that can't relate to the kids. But Adarabba, it never was there a time in which every taxi cab driver relates to the kids. I mean, it's like, well, that's a double push it. It's only those who need the controls, so who haven't gotten out of the Dotan complex. And it's very difficult. You should know that it's really only the people that are still getting something out of it that really engage in this. So if you get a parnasa out of it, you get covet out of it or something. But that's becoming less and less. It's fewer, but there's no covet in it anymore, There's just fights and Lashon Hara and newspaper articles. Who needs it? So as it becomes less and less useful for people, so it's less and less interesting. But the people in the street, they don't really buy. Even the people that are there, even people who live in Dotan don't really believe in Dotan anymore. No, seriously, it's an amazing thing. There's, to whatever extent, there's this amazing energy in Eretz Yisrael. This is what it is. It's the energy of the Kates. That's what it is. It's people that are feel that quickening, feel that clarity. And indeed, in Chutz La'aretz, it's one of the big bifurcations of the past 10 years, in which in Chutz La'aretz everything is yored into the horrors of shitot and religion and comfort, and I'm talking about psychological comfort, philosophical comfort, and even the supposed connections. Continuity. Who the hell needs continuity? We don't need this anymore. Why would you want this? And community building. Who wants communities? Why would I want to be part of this? What should we have? More kosher restaurants? I mean, kosher restaurants. All of the things that people are interested in are completely boring and useless for any sense of what the real meaning of Yisrael is. But this is like to them this ethnic projection of what else do I have? We try to get together for, we all keep Shabbat together. That should hold us. Family prays together, stays together, whatever. I mean, it's so useless. New educational ideas. How do we interest our children into, it never occurs to them, maybe you should learn Torah. Maybe that would interest the children. That's fine. So how do we get a new Sesame Street that will give them some sense of what it means to be? I mean, it's incredible. Whole books come out of this, websites, and people dedicated their whole lives and millions of dollars that are, oh, wow, I got this brilliant idea, we'll make this amazing. And you look at this, it's mamish. I mean, you can only cry. Like, adults are actually doing this and believe there's some purpose in it. It's really painful. No matter how long you're going to put off the inevitable. It's just like you're staving off with ethnic things. What for?
It's really horrifying. You do it beyond a month. But I was, I don't know if I should record it.
You won't record it.
Yeah, but the most
Should we close the recording?
Shaykh maybe. But I think it's worth I have to go to these.
I stop it, it's off.
Oh no, okay. They have this conference of European rabbis, So they think we can talk about Milah and Shchita. Okay, so I have a chiyuv to go and fix it. So until now, all right, whatever they spoke about, you vote. The last time they sat together, they actually brought this up, and it was the most horrifying thing. I think that when we speak to people, they're saying, and then this is, happening all over Europe. When we speak to people, especially about Islam and relationship with the Muslims, we can't mention Eretz Yisrael. We have to distance ourselves from Eretz Yisrael. We have to remove ourselves. Don't mention it. Kilo. It doesn't have anything to do with us. B'fem aleh.
Just religion. Just religion.
No, we shouldn't identify ourselves with Eretz Yisrael at all, especially in Europe. These are European rabbis in Europe saying this after World War II, after everything's gone and after everything they're seeing, and they're insisting on saying outright, with a vote, that we should agree not to distance ourselves from Eretz Yisrael. So you find yourself there, and all I could do, like on the moment, was I officially abstained because I didn't want to vote against it to show that I was involved in it, like I had an opinion, or I just had to stay out. But it was so horrifying because they should say b'fem aleh in Europe. I don't know. Maybe it was less horrified. Maybe it was less horrified. I mean, to me, it was the most scary thing I'd ever seen. And it's all that, what's going to happen if it's real, if it's actually going to go into Eretz Yisrael.
We know you're there, Mishi. We know you're there. Show yourself. Everybody wants to say hi.
Your magic twang of froggy.
That's quite amazing.
No.
But it's just like another small, inevitable example of the end. This is just very open.
Yeah,
very open. Very open.
Before we get to
Yes.
but my father's worked in NCSY for about 40 years now. And at one point I was a madrich on some H trip in the US or whatever, and I called him. I said, I have all this experience in doing this kind of work. Can you give me some ideas in terms of something? It's a 3-week trip, something I want to be able to give this a while ago. Something I want to be able to leave these kids behind. He says, I'll tell you the truth. These days, there's this great website that has all these wonderful ideas in terms of group work and this and that. I said, what is it? He says, I think it's Latter Day. And it turns out that for 15 years, because the truth is, the way things are in the US, those are the two most closest groups in terms of their aims and goals and everything, and they've been working with each other to the point where now the Jewish drug addicts are sent to Utah.
Listen, man, this came out with an amazing book at the analyzing the shidduch crisis. And the shidduch crisis among the Mormons is precisely the same, for precisely the same reasons as it is with the religious Jews. They had an amazing analysis of what age the boys get married and why the women aren't available, and all the crises of the boys that are going out for parlos.
And they met. They met to discuss it and to come up with a
it's all symptoms of religion. It's nothing to do with God. So it has to do with being religious. So it's amazing. Yeah. Anyway, but listen, these are passing phenomena, Baruch Hashem. Kriyat Shema is still there, and Bismillah is still there, and Kel Shakai's work undoubtedly is going to be vindicated in Bezrat Hashem. So, no.
So is that me saying I don't have to worry about my kids becoming religious?
You have to worry.
I should be afraid.
You should worry. Yeah.
I have 2 questions and one larger question.
Okay, let's see, I mean, it's getting late. Let's see if it's something that the rabbi will
So
benefit
I'll
from.
put it all out there.
Okay.
Okay, so I wanted to ask for some more clarity on what Rebbe means by conditions, and some more clarity about the distinction between sims and ailouts. And I understand that that's
These
an
are all
explanation, but
This is a Mishnah. Here is a Mishnah. You want the whole Gemara? No, I'm very serious.
no, I just wanted to
Well, no, what you're asking for, not only the Gemara, you want the Taisus and you want the Marsha on the
Is that what I'm
Taisus.
asking?
Yeah, I think that's the only thing that would satisfy you. I mean, I'm not again, but I don't think it's for this year. I'm happy to discuss it. But the idea of this year here is always like that. It's a structure. It's a Mishnah. That's all that Yaakov Avinu was capable of giving over at the time. Takes thousands of years. You got that much time? You got that much time? It's a long Gemara. Seriously, you understand?
I guess
As a Mishnah, I think it's clear enough. For Kolecha v'yachad l'fi rochav sheyesh b'libo, as the Rambam says, go to explore. The rest is Gemara.
I think what Meir Simcha might be asking, and what I'm feeling is that Rabbi has this look in his eyes.
Yeah.
Just that the mission is supposed to be able to provide you a connection with the totality, even if the entirety is certain to you, you still have a connection to the entirety, and you're still able to perceive the entirety. So I think it just might be helpful for, I can say, at least for me, I assume it's what it's at the bottom of my Simcha's questions as well. It might be helpful for everyone, just have more words of experientially what that kind of difference would mean, like what it would mean to be involved in Kriyas Shema in a way that would be tied into the case, and what it would mean to be to be.
Moshe, I really think that you already know the answer to that. Right? I think that you should try to imagine what you would say to someone who would ask you that question, and then record it, and then play it back to yourself, and let that be your answer. Seriously, I think that you do very well, Baruch Hashem, with your own experience of life that is deeply connected with a profound sense in everything that you do, of where it is that the world is going, and of a commitment to it, and a joy in it, and a love of life, and a belief that you're part of Vayechi Siyum Bereishit, and no doubts about the significance of yourself. That's what I see. You may have problems with it, a little point A and a little point B. That's the things that I'm calling conditions. Little things like the human condition, like dying, or like being lazy, or like you being unable to get yourself to do the kind of things that those are human condition elements. They have to do with the fact that you are an evolved product that has got a lot of problems and complexities that have to be ironed out. That's all.
Let's say because they've 20-30 years of seasoning.
That's why the Yetzer is toughened. It's seasoning. Yeah, exactly. What were you asking?
I'm saying it opens up the Ramchal Zafar Pishen or Masim Tovim.
This is the ultimate tikva.
That explains.
That's the point of tikva. I spoke about it on Shabbat. I don't know. Because I have so many pages of notes, I decided to ignore them because it's getting so many. But I forgot to mention. But that's so deeply. This is the Lishot Chativit Hashem. This is where that tikva was discovered. In the search for the caves, which is exactly Ein Bereshit Ela Tikva, says the Ramchal. And that tikva, that's what you hold on to. That's the kal. That's why it appears here. The simple meaning is like, leaves you, okay, yeah, fine. But the sense that he brings, the Ramchal brings this pasuk. And the whole shar tikva is all tikvat shav. This is the only tikva, and this is the Yud Kei Vav Kei that follows.
The human condition.
But that,
The fact that he relates it to the human condition, I've already explained, the low Yavoshu.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, bro. You could be in the middle of hell. You could be literally the depths of hell. And you just fly out, utilizing tickets on wine. You see this amazing stuntman. That's what it is. It's an amazing stuntman. But that's what they're using. They're using that curve of the true, and that's what, this is the first appearance of that. Instead of all along his whole life, he's been talking about Kel Shekai. All of a sudden, Shuatcha Kiviti Hashem. That's it, and that's the same Shem that's announced later. I used to be Kel Shekai. Now I am Shmi Hashem. I'm telling you, that's my team.
That's the sign off. Wow.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I can't believe I forgot to mention that. Thank you so much. That was so central to the whole issue.
So that would be an entirely.
So there is hope for you.
That would be would be an entirely different level of understanding the evolution of the Koch Meiser in terms of the implications for the tickle of the human condition.
Yeah, but it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's own. That's Reb Joey. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one who has the hope. That's the Ein Reshit Alatikva. That's the Ma'amin B'Mamo. I mean, the fact that you can, that's exactly, that you're sharing that exact vindication. I'm waiting for this contact. You're waiting for this contact. And this is what happens over here at Siyum Bereishit, ever since Siyum. It's just an amazing moment of pure, beautiful hope. Hope that there won't be any more questions.
There's one other place that's also not Goro, and that's the Nachala itself. The old
Yes, beautiful,
caves.
excellent.
And it even shows up in the prophets.
That's the go around. Excellent. Thank you so much. This is amazing patterns that he catches. It's fantastic. Thank you so much. And again, it's an anticlimax, but thank you so much for coming. I love you.
You tried it once, it didn't work.
I can't. I love the